the LaxFactor podcast.
What is up, college lacrosse fans? You are watching episode 144 of the LaxFactor Lacrosse podcast. Today, big show. We've got number 4 Georgetown taking on number 10 Denver. We're going to talk about that game and show highlights. We're also going to talk about my top 4 candidates that I think really have a shot at winning the Tewaaraton Trophy. So before I get into it, as always, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and you can go to laxfactor.com, get yourself swag, hats, t-shirts, and other cool things as well. So let's dive into it. There's a couple of stories that contribute to the final outcome of this game, so let's unpack those. First, the Hoyas came out buzzing. The Hoyas did come out. They scored 2 quick goals early in this game. That gives them a lead. That kind of sets the tone, and everyone that's watching is like, oh, this is kind of what we expected. Georgetown has been getting hyped up like crazy, but not so fast. From there, Jack Hanna took over, and that was the first key to this game for Denver. Key to their season, really. Jack Hanna needed to improve his shooting percentage. I've been saying it every week, but slowly but surely he's been kind of showing and has been stepping up a little bit more. In this game, he did exactly what he needed to do. 4 goals off just 8 shots in this game. 3 of those goals coming over the first half, 2 of them in the first quarter early. His 2 goals in the first quarter gave them a 2-up tie and then gave them a 3-2 lead early on. So once they got that 3-2 lead, they never looked back from there. Another storyline worth mentioning, Denver, they seem to heavily attack Georgetown's shorties and their midfield unit in general. And I'm not sure if this was a concerted effort to go after their short stick D mids and maybe even their LSM a little bit. But it did seem as the game went on, that was what happened. Now, you know, their short stick D mids have played well early, and I even said Georgetown, it looks like they have the complete picture on the defensive side of the ball. They have short stick D mids that aren't giving up a ton of points. A lot of that early on, though, I was kind of basing off the box score, off what the other team did from a scoring perspective, and that ends up being rough over their first 2 games where they only give up 1 goal apiece in those first 2 games. But they got exposed a little bit here in terms of that short stick D mid unit, and then maybe even an LSM. Maybe it's a depth thing in those areas, or maybe it's just that Denver's guys overachieved, but that was worth watching. For Georgetown, it would definitely appear that missing Gibson Smith on the defensive side, All-American defender, you're missing an All-American close defender, and if you don't have the depth to fill, you can never replace a Gibson Smith anyway, but you can still play good, sound team defense if you have a good defense and a good defensive scheme without that player. And Georgetown, they seem to be struggling a little bit in that help defense, and I'd have to imagine that missing arguably your best close defender, your best cover guy, that's going to hurt you. Missing the veteran leadership that player would bring to anchoring the defense, talking the defense through progressions, making sure guys are in position and sliding, that's going to hurt. And it looked like that was definitely the case. Their help defense wasn't up to par, up to snuff or whatever you would say. So that could have been what played into the short stick D mids not having a great outing as well, because Denver's midfield unit definitely put up some points here in this one. And, that's going to end up hurting over time. Owen McElroy is human as well. We've seen the last couple of games. McElroy in those first few games was just an absolute nut job stopping balls at a really high percentage, but we're starting to see that those early games were just against crap opponents for the most part. I think the one that got everybody was St. John's beat Hofstra, and then Georgetown comes out and puts the big hurt, I think 19-1 on St. John's. So I think that was one of those early ones where it's like, ooh, St. John's may not be that bad. They beat Hofstra, who's now a ranked team, but that was Hofstra's first game. But now, in hindsight, St. John's not having a great season after that Hofstra win. So McElroy, I'm sure he'd say that wasn't his best outing. He ends up with 12 saves versus 13 goals against, which for any normal goalie against Denver, you'd be like, that's a pretty good stat line. For McElroy, he expects to be above 50%. And then you could just see, give him 2 of those saves, and then all of a sudden this 13-7 game is a 11-7, maybe it goes swings a different way. So it's one of those deals where you don't get stops that you normally make. That's going to hurt your defense overall as well. So I think that's at play. McElroy will be fine. He's a hell of a goalkeeper. It's just that, him not standing on his head is going to affect the outcome for Denver when they play against good teams like this. Georgetown did well at the faceoff dot versus Alex Stathakis for Denver. He won 13 of 24 draws for the Pios. If you told me pregame that Stathakis was only going to just about split the faceoffs, I would have said Georgetown probably wins by a goal or 2. I would have expected that this game would have been a little bit closer with that face-off mix being equal, but that kind of shows you that Georgetown's defense is, at least at this stage, not as advertised. Give them Gibson Smith back, and if he's playing in the next time these teams meet, totally different story. And keep in mind, Georgetown has a history of losing to Denver in the regular season and then beating them in the Big East tournament later in the season, so that could be at play as well. What we saw was one team has been battle-tested and has played more games than the other. The other team has played a very weak schedule thus far and was missing their best defender, so all of those things I would think have to play. Not excuses. I mean, Denver beat them, and Denver was quite obviously the better team, at least on this day for sure. So not taking anything away from Denver, but you can't argue that Georgetown's defense just didn't look good, and so far this season, more often than not, they have looked very good. Per Lacrosse reference, oh, actually, no, and then despite the Hoyas' high-end close D minus Gibson Smith here, the Denver attack duo of Walker and Jackson Morrill, they put up 3 goals and 2 helpers and 4 assists, respectively. Walker was 3 and 2, and Morrill had 4 assists. Walker's goals, they all came late, so leading up to kind of his 3 goals that he scored between the third and the fourth quarter, he scored 2 really late. Like his last 2 goals were the last 2 goals of the game, and they came with like 3 minutes left and 2 minutes left or something like that. He was 1 and 2 leading into the final 4 minutes of the game. And then Morrill, all assists. So the close D, they did a good job of bottling up the Denver attack and not giving up goals, but they gave up 6 assists to the top 2 attackmen for Denver, so that plays. And that kind of showed, too, their off-ball play wasn't up to snuff. That last goal of the game, it may have been to Walker, where he cut across the crease. You could call that the backbreaker, and maybe they had kind of, I don't think they gave up, but that was kind of a late-game crap-time goal. But overall, they gave up a lot of over-the-top cross-field passes to step-down shots and things like that. So they were a little bit soft in terms of getting out on the perimeter and stopping shooters when guys were feeding from behind. And then I questioned one of those assists that they gave to Morrill. He throws it from behind up to, I think it was Simmons on one side, and then Simmons dodged to the cage, and they gave him an assist for that. So I wasn't sure if that should have been an assist, but I think that was credited as one. Per Lacrosse Reference Pro, Denver's offensive efficiency has been on the rise since their big stinker that they put up against UNC in their second game. It's actually Denver's defensive efficiency that has gone down, but you'll sometimes see that when you're playing down opponents, your defensive efficiency takes a crap, because if you're beating someone by a good margin, you end up letting some things up on defense, you end up getting some guys in. So that's not uncommon, and they had a decent outing here against Georgetown in terms of defensive efficiency. But offensive efficiency, they had their second best game of the year here. They were above, I think it was 40% or so versus Georgetown, and they had kind of, that's a hell of a job against one of the best defenders, best defenses in the country, supposedly, is that you put out your best offensive game overall in terms of efficiency score against that really solid defense. So that's huge. So that's it. What's the story from here? Denver is good, and we knew they were going to be. We knew after that UNC just absolute beatdown that was an anomaly, and then Denver did prove slowly but surely, hey, we're going to win games. So Denver's now, 6-2, and Georgetown drops to 4-1. But they'll both be okay. Georgetown, there is a lot of question around the strength of that schedule, and come the end of the season, how is that strength of schedule going to hurt them, or maybe it will help them? I'd lean into it hurting them. You get into the playoffs, they're going to make the playoffs because their record's going to be good enough, and, I don't know. I'd assume that they would get it. I would assume that Georgetown's not going to end up going like 10-1 or 10-2 or something like that and not get into the tournament, even though in other years that could end up happening. So I think that Georgetown's going to be okay. I think I might have misspoke and said Denver when I meant Georgetown, but I think Georgetown's going to be okay. And we know Denver is. So let's watch and see what happens the next time these guys meet. Let's just rip through some stats, though, so you can kind of see what the stat line looked like in this one. For Georgetown, scoring, we did not see Jake Caraway tear it up. Denver did a good job bottling him up. He goes for 2 goals in the game. And then it was like Declan McDermott, 2-1. Graham Bundy Jr., he's factored in a few games. He had 2 assists. So Georgetown, not really all that high-powered offensively. Denver did a very good job bottling them up. And we look at that Denver stat line. Ethan Walker, 3-2. Morrill, 0-4, as we said. Jack Hanna, 4 goals off of those 8 shots. That was huge. Alex Simmons, 2-1. Lucas Kotler, 1-1. Ted Sullivan, 1-0. Danny Logan, 1-0. So the midfielders got involved for Denver. They played well. More importantly, Jack Hanna played well. Denver picks up a win. That is all huge. Now, let's get into our Tewaaraton talk. That's what I've been waiting to do here. I want to talk about 4 guys that I think have a shot at winning the Tewaaraton, because I think it's these 4 guys' race. But I really only think that 3 of them have a real legitimate shot at winning it. And then all 3 of those guys, if any one of them are able to lead their team to the national title and win, the award probably goes to that guy, unless some of the others tear it up. Absolutely. So let's dive into the first guy I want to talk about, Hofstra's Ryan Tierney. He's kind of the dark horse. Hofstra would have to win their conference. They would have to get into the tournament and advance to at least the second round to even have him, for him to even have a shot. And then he'd have to continue this ridiculous pace that he's been on here thus far, which is going to be really hard to do, albeit he is very capable, especially with the schedule that Hofstra has. So far in 2021, for Tierney, 23 goals, which is good for 5.75 goals per game, which is first in the country. Then he's also got 7 helpers, 30 points over 4 games. That's 7.5 points per game overall, which is also first in the country. This kid's been tearing it up lately. 6 goals in their most recent game against Wagner, 8 goals and 3 assists in their 20-17 win over Stony Brook. And that's the big thing. In that loss to St. John's, he was the reason they were in that game at the end and forced overtime. And, they end up losing that game, but I think he was 8-2 or 8-3 in that game as well. And then he does the same thing against Stony Brook, but except in this one, they end up winning that game 20-17. So you put up 11 points in a 20-17 win, you're doing your job. I once put up 12 points in a 20-17 win over Morrisville, 10 goals and 2 assists. And what I don't tell people is that the defender that started guarding me in that game weighed 300 plus. I roached him for a couple of goals. They put on a second defender on me who was probably all of about 5'4". He was a hobbit. I didn't see his feet, but I bet you the tops of his feet were really hairy, and then I scorched him for like another 5. So I don't tell people that. Morrisville did have a sick goalie that year, so it was fun beating him. But yeah, the defenders that were guarding me were not very good. JUCO did not have a lot of depth once you got out of the top 10. So he's played well. He's played very well all year. Kids played big-time lacrosse in the clutch, more importantly, but alas, Hofstra, they're not a team that will assist him in getting seen, and they're now on pause because of COVID, so he had a chance of going into the Dome, getting some primetime action there on the ACC network, where people were going to see him play against Syracuse, a top-ranked team, and that's canceled, and it will not be rescheduled, it doesn't look like, so he loses one of those really quality opponents that would have gotten him noticed. If he could have put up 9 points, 10 points against Syracuse, hey, giddy up, this kid is still in the race, and maybe then we're talking about legitimate chance at winning it, but I'm not thinking that he really does. I think he's the dark horse, and like I said, his team has to way overachieve and make a run into at least the second round of the playoffs for him to even have a chance. He have to be seen, and those playoff games would get him seen. The group that votes for this award, they want to see guys, they want to vote for guys that are playing for big-time teams and big-time games, and he's just not going to meet that. So you end up having to tear it up like crazy to get there. Next guy I want to talk about, Jared Bernhardt from Maryland. Some put Bernhardt number 2 on their list. I put him at 2.5. I don't want to call him my third on my list because it wouldn't really be fair to him. He's a hell of a lacrosse player. So I'm putting him at 2.5 here, just a hair behind my number 2 guy. The best overall dodging goal scorer in this group for sure. He can shake guys, muscle guys, run guys down with speed, and just score goals. Incredible overall athlete, but it doesn't just stop there. He's not just a goal scorer. He can create offense for other people and feed, and more importantly, he's good at letting the game come to him. In terms of efficiency, Bernhardt's a fairly efficient player. He's going to take a lot of shots. He's going to miss some shots because he does a lot of dodging and shooting on the run and shooting under duress. But just like Chris Gray, who we'll talk about later, he's able to create his own shot, and he does it with kind of an aggressive anger to it. You know, Chris Gray, Mike Sowers, those guys are kind of finesse dodgers, and Jared Bernhardt, I would call him the grumpy dodger. is what we're going to start calling him here, I think, through the end of the year. 2021 stat line, 16 goals. That's good for 4 per game and 6th in the country. 8 helpers, that's 2 per game and 28th in the country. And then 24 points overall, which is good for 6 per game, 6 points per game, which is good for 6th in the nation. Lately, had a monster game in his last outing against Rutgers, 6 goals and a helper, and then he was 5-1 in the previous game against Hopkins. The kid is pinging his average. That's key here. You haven't seen him yet jump out and have a 12-point game or a 10-point game. So like Sowers and Gray have both had, some reasonable games in the area, 3 or 4 points, and then they've had their 8, 9-point games. He's just been hitting 6-point game, 6-point game, or maybe a 5-point game, 7-point game. He's been much closer to his average across Maryland's game so far. So he's been great. He's been consistent. He played huge in some big games here in the game over Rutgers, 6-1. That's huge against a top-ranked team, and that win helps Maryland kind of say, hey, we're still king shits in the big, and that's so being consistent matters. Being consistent and playing well in big games matters, and that's just what Bernhardt does. It's what Bernhardt has done since he's in Maryland, and it is why Jared Bernhardt wears the number 1. I am glad to see him tearing it up. I was afraid we might see happen to him what's happened so far to Dox Aitken, where being away from your team in the fall, he was trying to play football in the fall, that might play into him being rusty. No rust on this kid's game. He has played like a monster from the very first game right on. My next guy, Michael Sowers of Duke fame here, formerly Princeton. He was my preseason pick to win it, but I still think he's just a touch behind Chris Gray for this. Sowers and Bernhardt, they're kind of neck and neck with, like I said, Sowers, in my opinion, having just that slight edge. The most fundamentally sound player that we've seen in college lacrosse in years. Can do it all, but quarterbacking and offense is really this kid's deal here. In 2021, 18 goals, 26 helpers. Those 26 helpers are good for 4th in the country, 3.25 assists per game, 44 points over 8 games, and 50. That's good for 5.5 points per game and 16th in the country. Not the high-profile scorer that we wanted him to be here, but he's just starting to kind of figure out his place within this Duke offense, and Duke is loaded offensively, especially in terms of depth of scoring. So just to kind of give you an idea of where Sowers stands compared to others in terms of how much help is Bernhardt getting and how much help is Gray getting compared to the help Sowers is getting. Off the charts. Sorry. I swallowed some ice, or I put some ice in my mouth there, and I had to chew that and into the mic. So for all you guys listening intently in your headphones, that's going to be unpleasant for you. So to give you an idea, Maryland, they have 3 guys that are scoring above 5 points per game, including Bernhardt as their leading scorer. They have 5 guys above 2.5 points per game and 8 guys with at least 1 point. UNC has 1 guy above 5 points per game, 4 guys above 2.5 points per game, and 8 guys with 1 point per game, and then 22 guys with at least 1 point. So you see UNC, they're about where Maryland is in terms of that middle of the road, 4 guys above 2.5 points per game, but they've got 22 guys that have recorded at least 1 point compared to Maryland's just 8 guys that have recorded at least 1 point. Now Duke, on the other hand, 1 guy above 5 points per game, that's in line with Carolina, 4 guys above 2.5 points per game, that also is in line with Carolina, 8 guys over 1 point per game, right in line in terms of keeping up with Carolina, 28 players with at least 1 point overall. So Duke is spreading it out a little bit more. Duke I think Carolina averages about 1 goal per game more than Duke as well. So he's not filling it up like people thought, but slowly but surely he has been, because lately he went 1-6 versus Jacksonville and then 4-1 in the previous game over High Point. So he's starting to figure out where he lives in this offense. And one of the things that he's been doing, which has been ridiculous, is the sneak from behind goals that he's put up lately, where he just realizes that I got the step, I'm going, and I'm going to bury it with no angle. How quickly he gets from that point behind the cage to in front of the cage and unleashing fury on the goalies in very sneaky ways. It's been pretty incredible to watch. So Sowers, he's almost a full point per game behind Gray, but his team relies on him just a bit more. Gray's does due to, or relies on him just a little bit less more than North Carolina does on Gray. And then more, Duke plays their starters a little bit less. So we're also dealing here with Sowers in terms of him getting, 3 to 5. I don't have an official stat on this, but I would assume if you were to compare their average playing time over the course of each game, that Sowers is probably hanging at 3 to 5 minutes less than Gray, because Duke is yanking their starters in the first quarter of games and putting that second attack line in. So he's getting a little bit less burn, but overall he has been very efficient, and both of these guys' teams are undefeated, so you can't argue with that. Now, my number one guy, obviously, Chris Gray, the odds-on favorite, unless Sowers leads Duke to a title and factors heavily in the process. That Duke-UNC head-to-head matchup is going to be big for these guys in determining who's going to be the favorite. So once these teams play, we could see that flip. If Duke comes out, beats North Carolina, and Sowers factors heavily, boom. You automatically now have Sowers in the driver's seat of that award, but they're going to have to beat UNC for him to take that driver's seat, I think. Hands down, though, if voting ended today, right now, it would be Gray's award. So far, 2021, 28 goals. That's good for 5 per game, 8th in the country. 17 assists, 2.43 per game. That's good for 22nd in the country. 45 points over 7 games. 7 games is good for 6.43 points per game and 3rd in the nation. His last outings, 4-1 against UVA. In the win over UVA, 3-goal win over UVA, and then he was 6-4 versus Mercer, which is kind of running it up on a bad team, but it was a relatively close game, 16-6. So he puts up 10 of their, factors in 10 of their 16 points for UNC. Gray, he's flashy, exciting, and overall, he's must-see TV. If you haven't watched him play yet, it's worth tuning into North Carolina just to see Gray operate. More importantly, it's North Carolina just runs beautiful offense. It's pretty fun to watch. But that's why Gray's a favorite. How you do it matters for this award. I've said that before. The reason that Pat Spencer won it for Loyola over Sowers, A, Pat Spencer's team advanced into the playoffs, so more people saw him. B, Pat Spencer brutalized people en route to that Tewaaraton in 2019, I think is when he won it. Just physical. Beat guys on the dodge, fed behind the backs, dive goals, putting up huge numbers. So Spencer earned it. And I mean, right now, Gray is doing what Spencer did in 2019, just in a different way, more finesse and things like that, and more flash. But it's been pretty exciting to watch. So I think that everybody would agree at this point that Gray is the favorite. But between that 3-man race at the top there, between Bernhardt, Gray, and Sowers, I think that those 3 teams right now are the 3 favorites to win the title. And I think the award should end up going to the guy that wins the title. If any one of those 3 guys wins a national title with their team and then factors and has a good game, I think that you'd have to be a moron not to give the award to that guy. We haven't seen it a lot. I'm trying to think, who was the last national title winner to win it? Was it Yale? I think it was probably I'm just drawing a blank right now on the number 2 from Yale that won the frickin' Tewaaraton. I don't know how that's possible, but now I'm going to have to look that up here. But I think that the whoever Yale Tewaaraton winner, this is going to drive me nuts. Ben Reeves. Oh my gosh. I mean, I talked about Ben Reeves that entire season nonstop. I was talking about Ben Reeves into the following season, and I could not pull his name out of my data banks right there. Matt Rambo before him. I think Matt Rambo, did Maryland win the national title in 2017? I think they did. If they didn't, either way, Matt Rambo won it in 2017. Last 3 winners, Rambo, Reeves, and Spencer. All of them deserving, and they didn't get it wrong in any of those 3 cases at least. So I don't think they'll get it wrong again this year, though. And I think that in the end, if one of those 3 teams wins the title, it's that guy that wins the Tewaaraton. All right, now I've just kind of said the same thing 15 times over. One other thing I want to get out there. Men's lacrosse, Doyle named PAC Defensive Player of the Week for Westminster. And why is Conor Doyle winning the PAC Defensive Player of the Week important to me? Because that motherfucker is a Whitney Point alum, folks, and I'm a big Whitney Point fan, being that I played there. So congrats to Conor Doyle, who literally grew up right down the road from me. He's from Glen Aubrey, New York. I grew up in, my address was Whitney Point, New York, but I lived 1 mile exactly from the Glen Aubrey fire station. So Doyle and I grew up in the same town. We went to the same high school. He is playing really well for Westminster. He got beat up a little bit in their first game of the year, but he logged a career high in saves, 16, and ground balls, 10, Saturday during Westminster's 9-8 triple overtime win at previously unbeaten St. Vincent. He ranks number 2 in the PAC this year in saves per game. So congrats to Conor Doyle. And to everyone who loves Whitney Point, congrats to us, too, for getting to talk about a Whitney Point kid here on the podcast. So that's it. I will be back Saturday morning, 10 a.m. for Saturday morning's live stream. 10 a.m. on Saturday. We'll talk about whatever games are about to happen. I think we got some games tonight. Notre Dame's playing somebody. So we'll talk about that Saturday morning, and then we'll talk about the games coming up for the weekend. One change for all of you Cuse fans that tune in is Cuse is not playing Hofstra Saturday at noon. Instead, they are now going to play Holy Cross at 1 at the Dome. So that's the only thing to mention, but we'll talk about that Saturday as well. So that is it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, be a friend, and share this with a friend. And that is all. You'll see me Saturday morning, 10 a.m. for the live stream. Hoost is out.